Great.
First of all, thanks so much for your time today. The first question I wanted to ask you was, what's your ultimate vision for mental health services in Australia? What level would you like to be at?
What I'd love to see is that there's multiple entry points through your life where you can access support. So young people can have a very easy entry into mental health support. But if people's mental health conditions get more complex, they equally can scale up the support that they get without the money side of it being part of the equation. Because right now, what we have is a situation where if you have money, you are far more likely to be able to access high-level mental health support than if you don't have money and you're relying on the public system. We have a two-tiered system. I would like to see the same level of support available for people through Medicare as we have for people who use private healthcare. But we've got a really long journey to get to for that. And the other thing I'd love to see is that if someone is feeling suicidal, their only option is not to go to hospital. Now, we are just starting to see pilots around safe spaces that are being created for people in that situation, but we've got a really long way to go, because that's where we lose a lot of people is in there's no support other than emergency, and they go to emergency and they don't necessarily get the help that they need, and they're discharged, and then within a few days of discharge, I think it's a fortnight of discharge, that's the biggest risk for suicide, because again, we haven't got that bit of the system right. So there's from when I first interacted with the system 15 or so years ago, there's been some big improvements, but there's still all these bits that need help. But you know, wouldn't it be great to know that it's not the size of your wallet that determined how good the mental health support was that you got? It was just the fact that you had a Medicare card.
Yeah, that's so important. So what's holding us back from reaching that at the moment, do you think?
I think there's a problem with the way the systems work at a state and federal level, where the responsibility is spread across both those, partly because the states have been dissatisfied with the level of funding and direction really from the federal government. So they've gone, oh, we need to fix this. And that means we've got a really uneven process. And I'm on the Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Committee, a select standing committee on mental health and suicide prevention. And hearing the different things in different states has been, some of it's great what's happening in some places, but we're seeing it in little pop-up bits, and that especially around things like eating disorders, the community health role, and even just making it easy access for people to have residential services, in fact, or even for women to access women's specific services. So there's lots of really interesting things happening, but they're happening all over the place, really fragmented. There's a lot of duplication of services rather than a pooling. So we've got to get a nationally agreed plan on how we do it. And then the federal government has to fulfill its side of the bargain. One of the things we also need to see is a lot more things become paid by Medicare, and that's extra item numbers for extra services. So there's just, it's the fragmentation of it. And right now, one of the good things this government has done is put some focus on it, and there's someone doing a national mental health plan. And one of the interesting things that is being talked about is that you don't just see mental health as this standalone thing, but actually every decision you make in government is done considering what the mental health impacts will be. I should say I also differentiate between people with lifelong complex mental illness versus those whose mental health is suffering. Because we do have you've got episodic, but lifelong things like bipolar, schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, like all those sorts of things require a different level of support than people who are experiencing anxiety and depression. But you've got to deal with all of them, because otherwise the early things can evolve very easily into the much more complex things with comorbidities that go, things that go with them, like drug and alcohol addiction. Yeah, it's complex.
Yeah, it really is. So what is your role in getting funding for a Headspace?
As the federal member, it's my job to advocate in Parliament and with ministers about the services and the infrastructure and the things that this community needs. So the first step is always to raise awareness about the need. And I think I was doing that long before I got elected, raising the awareness about the challenges families face when they go through this. So years of raising awareness, bringing people together to spread that awareness. I think we're at a point now where awareness is not the issue. People know there's a problem. They know the services aren't here. And so now it is just a matter of pushing for that to be allocated in the budget. Now, my view is the government absolutely recognises and accepts that there is a need for a Headspace among, and probably many other services, but Headspace is a good starting point for young people. They did make an allocation in the last budget that they haven't announced what it was for. I would be very surprised if there isn't already in the budget an allocation of a certain amount of money, several $1 million, that is already, it's got our name on it. It's just not been announced yet. And I don't understand why. I hope it isn't because they want to use it for political purposes. I can't understand why it's there. So I believe it's there. And my job now is to keep saying and nagging. I'm nagging, really, nagging for them to make that announcement, because it really is an urgent, urgent need.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of your speeches in the House of Reps on that, and it's clearly something that you're very passionate about. When do you think we could expect to see one open in the Hawkesbury?
Well, I'm actually surprised we haven't had an announcement by now. I'm surprised, disappointed, like all those things. So I just don't know. But we know we've got an election coming sometime between now and May. Perhaps it's going to be used in a pre-election announcement. I would really hope not. So my expectation is we'll see it sooner rather than later, and definitely before the next election. If it's not announced in the lead up to the next election by the government, then I will absolutely have more to say about it, because there is just no doubt that I've got a fundamental commitment that if it hasn't happened by the next government, then we absolutely have to set aside that money for it.
I know this is a personal issue for you. Could you please tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I didn't know very much about mental illness and the challenges of getting mental health support till I had a daughter, 15 plus years ago, who by the time she was in year 9 was suicidal. And clearly in the years leading up to that, she had observed things, but it wasn't obvious to us as her family, the pain that she was in. So that was the point when she was, look, I can't even tell you the exact age now, 14 or 15, I think it was 14, where we started trying to access, first off, emergency departments and enter the mental health system through the emergency department, and then from there try to go, okay, there's clearly a problem, and she hasn't killed herself, but we need support now to help her work through whatever it is that's going on. So that was a process that took years, cost her a lot in terms of the effort she had to make. It took a lot of money and a lot of time with little result. And that was our experience of going, oh my goodness, this is really hard. Now, things have improved since then, and young people have a better way of talking about this stuff earlier, and there's a recognition by parents that this can be a thing. But at that time, it really was something people didn't speak about a lot. Now, my daughter Phoebe was very happy for people to understand what was going on, why she couldn't always, she always got to her events, but why she would not always be herself at her soccer or her ballet or all the other things that she did. She actually ended up leaving school at the end of year 9 because her school attendance was very poor. But she was offered a place at a ballet school, a professional ballet school. She was an extraordinary ballet dancer. And so she had a pathway that she could take that allowed her to do the thing that got her out of bed in the morning. And so not every kid is as lucky as that, nor are they as lucky to have parents who could afford to do that or were willing to do that. And it was a very big journey for all of us, that first 12 months and then the subsequent years. So we've all learned a lot, and she's just turned 30. And lives with a mental illness and takes responsibility for managing her mental illness, and is a highly functioning and high achieving person. She's an actor now. It's not a great time to be an actor, but she continues to, that's her creative need that she follows. So that's what got us in. But the thing is, once you have a child and you talk about it, or they talk about it, other parents tell you all the stuff that's going on in their lives too. Whether it's mental illness, whether it's a physical illness, a debilitating or chronic physical illness, whether it's a disability, a learning issue, you find out really fast that no family is without its challenges, and that the systems that we like to think are there don't necessarily provide the support that you would hope. So that's really it was a real awakening of it. And I'm very fortunate that Phoebe is comfortable. She will speak about some of it. She's been an advocate herself for SANE and done some suicide prevention work with them about, maybe it's 2 years ago now, or 18 months ago now. So she thinks that you need to talk about this stuff, and that people will look at her and go, oh, well, if she's a bit like me, or gosh, if she can talk about this and get through it, maybe there's some hope for me.
Yeah. And it's great to hear that she's doing well and doing what she loves now.
Yeah, well, life is a roller coaster. And you know what you learn is to make the most of every moment of it, because things can shift very quickly.
Yeah. Headspace is a great service for young people, and it's a great entry way in. Are you working on anything to improve access to mental health services for people that are over 25?
Yeah, look, over and under. We have a real shortage of access for people under 12 with paediatric services. So that's the primary health network is funded by the government to address some of these gaps. They're not exclusively mental health focused, but I meet regularly with them and we talk about the gaps that I'm seeing and that they're seeing, and that GPs are reporting to them and specialists. So there's always a lot of work being done. So there's a big gap for paediatric mental health support for under 12s, and yet there is a service which is like an adult Headspace called Head to Health, which is due to open in Penrith at the end of the year. But in the interim, because of COVID, the government has funded pop-up services, and it has the same principle. It's called a no wrong door. So you go in and they may not be the people to help you, but they will be able to guide you and refer you to the next stage of support if you need it. But it provides some initial counselling and identification and sorting, really, of where you might fit within the system, and then support to navigate that system. And that opened 2 weeks ago, but last week was its first week, and it's started off during COVID as a phone number. So that's another good step. I do have one concern I have is that there is another service in Penrith called Like Minded, which offers a similar service set up by the New South Wales government. So this is where I go, well, look, they might each be great. I don't know that they're offering anything very different to each other. And I question why they're not working collaboratively, but perhaps in time, that sort of collaboration, and they'll work out which bit they're servicing more effectively. So it's very early days. We're also seeing in Penrith, and all of this starts in Penrith, it never starts in the Hawkesbury, it always starts in Penrith, which drives me really mad. But they're setting up a place that is if you are feeling suicidal or a danger to yourself, you can go into this space, a non-medical space. So not with doctors and psychiatrists and the like, but creating a safe, supportive space to see whether that can help you avoid hospitalisation. And that's I think COVID has slowed that process down a bit. But again, that's another service that's really welcome. One of the things we saw from when I first had to take a child to hospital, over probably within sort of 5 or 6 years after that, we started to see PEC units in emergency departments, so psychiatric emergency centres, and they were specific for people with a psychosis or suicidal. And so they weren't in with the general emergency department patients, they were given a separate area. And those sorts of improvements are really welcome, and they're continuing to evolve.
Yeah, definitely. And it would be great to see some of these services starting in the Hawkesbury and the Blue Mountains as well.
Wouldn't it? But the Hawkesbury Hospital does not have any mental health capacity. And there is a big conversation to have there about how, what the community expects in terms of having a local service supporting people going through a mental illness or an episode, about whether we think it's acceptable that people can only go to Nepean, or whether we do think we need something locally. Certainly in the mountains, Katoomba has a very active, dedicated mental health service within the Blue Mountains Hospital.
Yeah. We also know that men access mental health help less readily than women. So what do you think can be done to change that?
There is a big piece of work there to be done. But what I'm seeing is ground up stuff happening where men are bringing men together to talk about it. There's a group called the Men's Table. There's also the local suicide bereavement group called the Network, which is creating spaces for men to be able to talk about issues, a range of issues. We do know. I think it's wrong to think that every mental health circumstance is similar. There's just such a range of things that affect people. So it's partly that, and then you've got to overlay gender to it, and then age. So there's just all these different things. So that's why a big plan around it is so important, and identifying the triggers for mental ill health in men will probably show us some different triggers, but there are things we know for everybody. Financial stress is a massive trigger. Divorce and child custody things are a massive trigger. So if you fail to address those underlying issues, you're probably only ever going to be able to end up dealing with the consequence, not the causes. So that's why I think this holistic thing where you look at what are the things governments do that exacerbate distress, mental distress amongst people. And I think we're going to need those sorts of things to really tackle in the long term a lot of mental health. And the triggers will be different depending on genders and ages.
Yeah, of course. So is improved mental health services your party's commitment? And how do you think we can get there?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were last in government, which is a really long time ago, you know, we're coming up to almost a decade, I was at the launch of the Penrith Headspace with the then Minister Mark Butler, the Minister for, he was specifically Minister for Ageing and for Mental Health. He's now the Shadow Minister for Health, including mental health. So he has a massive commitment to it, and we demonstrated that in government, creating Headspace, transforming how primary care is delivered. So primary care being everything that doesn't happen in a hospital. That's when Medicare locals, which were then privatised and became primary health networks, were created as a way to steer funding so local communities could have more autonomy about the sorts of mix of things they needed, because every area is different. So we showed in government transformative stuff. It's really hard to do from opposition. You don't control the purse strings. You don't have the power of the parliament to pass legislation. So our role in opposition is to really advocate and push the government in the directions we believe it needs to go. But in government, it is an absolute priority. It should be a priority for every government. This nation is suffering. COVID has made it worse,
yeah.
but it was already an urgent crisis before COVID and before bushfires and before floods. You know, this is something that as a country we need to tackle, irrespective of who's in government.
Yeah, it's definitely been a need that's been there for a long time. So how effective do you believe the satellite Headspace in Katoomba has been?
It's made a huge difference. I always wished that it wasn't a satellite. I thought it needed to be a full service Headspace. And the things that can go missing when it was a small amount of money, but I mean, they've done incredible things with the space that they have, and with the, I think the strength has been the ability to connect in with a community that is very used to collaboration. The ecosystem of the Blue Mountains is one that has, since the 70s, has had a very collaborative approach to delivering community services. And there is a difference in the Hawkesbury. The Hawkesbury just operates, partly because it's such a much bigger and more spread out area.
Yeah.
It operates differently. So they've done incredible things, but they needed more funding. And I was really pleased to see that additional funding was made available to them. I guess what frustrates me is that because the initial funding was for a small amount of money, the organisation who won the tender made decisions on that basis. So they have a very small site. There's not capacity to grow without massive investment. So the decisions they made now constrain their ability to do all the things that they might like to do to support young people's mental health. I think they've found the suicidal ideation data to be much higher than they anticipated. So what they intended to do and what they've ended up doing might be two different things, but then these have been very difficult times. So it's fantastic they're there. There's heaps of capacity for it to grow and expand, as there is to support other organisations who can pick up where they leave off. But ideally, a Headspace is a bit of a hub for holistic advice and guidance and support for someone, everything from supporting them through study and to find work, as well as the medical support that they might need from psychologists and psychiatrists and GPs, through to the therapies that might be managed through a range of practitioners, plus, really importantly, the peer support that they get there. Mm. And that's another thing we've really underestimated, is the role that peer support plays. So it's great to have, and I can just see it going from strength to strength.
It's great that there's so much support growing up here. Hopefully we can see that in the Hawkesbury soon as well.
Yeah.
What other projects are you working on?
Oh, there's so many. There's, look, right now, I think we're all focused on getting back to some normality out of COVID, while still recognising that COVID, the Delta variant and any others are going to be around. So small business is a real key area of support. And you think about the impact that fires had on the tourism sector in the Blue Mountains, and you look at the support that's needed to get that sector back thriving again, that's just a huge amount of support that is needed in a whole lot of ways. Now, some of it is coming in through bits and pieces of bushfire funding, and there's another round happening at the moment, but I think that's got to be a really key area of community development, the Upper Mountains, tourism and hospitality sector. But in the interim, even supporting them to be able to reopen and looking at how that happens, and in a way that we don't get this us and them stuff around vaccinated people and unvaccinated people. We've got really big social issues that we need to work through because the community has become increasingly divided. So that's, like, I look at my electorate and I think, oh, the Upper Mountains, there's just so much to do up there to get that back to being a really thriving tourism and local economy. So that's one thing. You know, we've also got big issues like Western Sydney Airport and where the flight paths will be and what impact that will have on us. So that's something I continue to push for. There's things like the infrastructure that's being, the roads that are being built in the Upper Mountains and in the Hawkesbury, the bridge that's being constructed, massive projects with huge amounts of Commonwealth funding. And I think every MP's job, and I know this will be happening with the state MP as well, in each area, the desire to make sure that those projects best meet the needs of the local community and are done with as minimal impact as possible to the local community. So there's some of the big things. And I guess the other one, which is not Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury specific, but is fundamental for us, is action on climate change and making sure that there are policies that ensure we build a really strong renewables energy so that we can switch our reliance from fossil fuel sourced energy to renewable energy. I mean, that has just got to be one of the single most fundamental things that we should all be working at every level, at a community, council, state and federal level. And I know in the Blue Mountains and in some levels of government in the Hawkesbury that is happening too. So yeah, there's probably a dozen other really big things but there's some of them.
They're all really important though. And I've got one last question for you. What would you like people to know about you personally?
This is probably the hardest question of the lot. You know, when you've been around, as I have now, as a political aspirant or a member of parliament for 11 years, you think people know who you are, but in fact, you know, they don't. There's hundreds there'd be tens of thousands of people who really don't. So what I'd like them to know is that I've come into politics to try and make changes that will benefit families and people who might be doing okay, but suddenly they find themselves not doing so okay. And you just never know when your family or you as an individual will get hit by something. And that's where governments are there to either support you through a temporary phase so that you can move through it, or to provide you long-term support so you can deal with whatever it is life has thrown your way. And I worry when people think that politics is made up of politicians, because I just see myself as a mum, a daughter of someone in aged care, a former small business owner who really thinks about as each individual aspect. I recognise that all our lives are different and we all have different needs. Now, if your life is going fantastically, that's great. Then you probably need as little government interference in your life as possible, and that's the ideal. But if it's not, they're the group of people that we have to be fighting for. People who are so busy just trying to get through life, that they don't necessarily have the energy to fight for themselves. And they need us to be saying, hang on, this isn't fair. Let's try and make this a bit more even. Because quite frankly, any of us tomorrow could end up with our lives fundamentally changed, as ours was